What's going on, everybody? It's Bill Bailey with today's Boondoggle. And yeah, I've been wanting to make this conversation happen for a little while now. We got a lot of layers of the onion to unravel and stuff I wanted to pick this man's brain on. But without further ado, Mr. Michael Graves, formerly of the
Hello.
Misfits.
Hello.
Good to see you again, my friend.
Good to be here.
So usually when I have somebody on for the first time, I like to do a little background first. So originally, what'd you want to be when you grew up?
You broke up there. Originally, say that again.
Originally, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Originally, oh man. Well, a lot of things, to be honest with you. I wanted to be I wanted to be a preacher. I wanted to be a downhill Olympic skier. I wanted to be an astronaut for a minute or two, and then I wanted to be a musician. Yeah, I fell in love with music when I was about probably about 10 or 11 years old. I really music just came into me like somebody put a spell on me.
Nice. So you accomplished that part. You're kind of a preaching musician, a little bit. So you got two of those there, and you enjoy the snow. So I don't know about the downhill skiing part, but
One of the joys in my life and to this day is skiing down a mountain as fast as I possibly can. I love skiing.
nice. So look at that. Check the boxes.
Yeah.
But so you said around 10, 11 is like kind of when you discovered music and were drawn to it.
Yeah.
What was some of the early music that really caught your ear and kind of you knew this is something I want to do?
Oh, this is dating me. So, I lived in a musical household, and by musical, I mean that there was a lot of music available to me. I remember we had a big 8-track player, we had record players, and there was a fine collection of records. My uncle lived in the house with me, my mother's younger brother, so he was hip on all the the 70s music, and so there was a lot of like Bruce Springsteen, Billy Joel, like singer-songwriter stuff, Rolling Stones, Don McLean type stuff, but there was always a radio on, so there was always pop radio on, late 70s, early 80s music. So there was just always music on. But I remember having Daryl Hall and John Oates H2O record. The sounds that came out of that and the harmonies blew my mind. The Beach Boys. I was very, very young, and I came across a Beach Boys record, a single, and it was Barbara Ann on one side. I forget what was on the other side. But again, just the sound of those records was just amazing to me. And even I remember my uncle, he playing a Bruce Springsteen record, and I had never heard anything like that. And so it was that, it was that kind of stuff. I just, it was more the way that when I heard a song or I listened to a song, the way that it made me feel that blew my mind. It was like it's hard to explain. It's like when people talk about being able to taste colors, it doesn't make sense, so yeah, there was it was a lot of stuff like that. I had an older brother as well, and so like he was into things like Van Halen and Ozzy Osbourne and Megadeth and Metallica and so the first punk rock music I really heard was through my brother as well.
Nice. And then like when was it where you knew that like, hey, I want to actually do this. I want to create my own music and start learning to play?
I don't. I just remember at some point I said I want to do this. I want to be able to communicate. I want to be able to. I want to be able to get what's inside me out so that other people can experience it. And I think that I figured out that music was communicating in that way, but it was obviously it's more of a profound communication than writing or visual. It's a stimulus of a completely different part of your brain. It's much more on a magical supernatural level. So I remember again, my uncle who was living in the house at the time had this old acoustic guitar that was just sitting in a closet. Nobody ever played anymore. And I remembered that it was up there. So, um, I guess that was like fourth, fifth grade, maybe, because in fourth grade, I got to take the snare drum. I started playing drums and I wanted to play the saxophone and I tried. I was just awful, and it sucked. So I went to play the drums, which was great because I was able to really develop rhythm and learn rhythm and develop that part, and everything else that built upon that really helped a lot because rhythm is everything. So it was probably around then, fourth or fifth grade. It was just instant. It's like, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do is create sound and create these spells like I hear on the radio and that I hear on these tapes. And yeah. And obviously then MTV came along and just, mind is
Yeah,
blown, dude.
yeah, yeah. You wanted people to taste your colors, right?
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to get in on the I wanted to get in on that cosmic conversation.
Yeah,
Because again, when I was young and coming up, when I was young, music was through the 80s and into the 90s when we were watching over in communism fall and the Soviet Union falling, and there was just like freedom, it was freedom and liberty and just all of this goodness. And there was, remember the Freedom Fest over in Russia was like Bon Jovi and Skid Row and all these bands and Live Aid, the first Live Aid and Amnesty International. And there was just this feeling of like, wow, music is saving the world. And all of these artists, remember Sting and the first Earth Day with the B-52s and REM. It was just this amazing feeling of artists and musicians at that point changing the world. So it was really exciting as a young person to see that happening.
yeah, yeah. And then be like, well, how can I do my part to help the world? And
How do I get into this part? Right? How do I get into that room? How do I
yeah.
do it?
Yeah. So when did you like first start like playing out? Like, did you have like some local high school bands and stuff like that you started, or?
Yeah, same way everybody else does. Same way that everybody, their Genesis story. Mine's no different. There was other kids in town that wanted to rock and roll and were very different, and the strange ones always wind up finding each other, and we did. And so I started a band. Me, Scott Donahue, David Hogan, and Mike Rhodes. We started a band called Bambi Slam, and then there was another band called Bambi Slam. So we changed it to we changed it to Social Outcast. And it's funny how things work out. That my first band with my buddies when I was in like sixth grade was called Social Outcast.
Yeah, yeah. And then, like you said, bunch of the weirdos get together and are attracted to each other, or
Yeah,
for another term would be like the Misfits, kind of get
exactly.
together. So for that segue, how did that whole introduction happen for you and getting involved and playing with them?
One of the reasons I believe that my story is the way that it is because I always knew that I was going to be something. I always knew that I was going to be a musician. I didn't know the path. I didn't know the way. I just believed it. Just 100% believed it, and worked every day. Some days harder than others to hone my skills, to play, to just gave myself over to art and music and theater and all the different aspects of it in front of the camera and behind the camera. So It was in the summer times when I was in high school. I worked for a company up here in the Catskill Mountains. And my plan after high school was to come back up and move up to the country where I had friends, I felt comfortable, and I could play my music and have a job and just have a life up here. But when I was 18 years old, I was, playing in a band, doing all my things. My good friend drowned in the Catskill Creek up here. Now, as an 18-year-old, that blew my mind. I never lost anybody like that. It was just, it blew my mind. The whole, and that when you lose somebody close to you or even not so close to you, even if you see something on the TV, you go down that whole, mortality thing. So as an 18-year-old, just messed up my mind. And I decided I'm not going back up there. No way. I'm going to stay home and just figure something else out. So that summer that I stayed home, I got a job. I was working as I was working for a tree company, cutting down trees and putting it in the chipper and doing all that stuff. Learned that a long time ago from a friend of mine. Taught me when I was young. I told my friend's wife, my friend's husband, he says, "What are you going to be when you grow up?" So I'm going to be a musician. And he goes, "I got to teach you something so that you're going to have a job, be able to work in between." I was very, very young. And he taught me how to climb and how to cut trees and stuff. Oh, so I always had something to fall back on. It was amazing. I thought it was crazy back when I was young, but so that's what I was doing. I had a band called Mopes, and we needed to record a demo because we were really, really good. So I opened up the newspaper, and I turned to my girlfriend. It was like the Aquarian, the East Coast Rocker, and I'm like, there's 700 studios. What do I do? She said, choose the one with the biggest article, because that means that those people believe in themselves. They're spending that money on promo. So I picked a studio that was in Lodi, New Jersey. It was called Real Platinum. And so we go there, and as I'm doing the vocal part of the session, the owner of the studio, his name is Bobby Aleka, turns to me and he says, "You got a really good voice, man." He says, I'm working with these guys that are getting back together. They're called the Misfits. They're working on a project here. They're looking for a singer. They're looking to get back together. I got to give you his number. Give this guy a call and go audition for them. You're great. I said, all right. And I was like, I'm thinking death metal. I'm like, all right, I can't sing death metal. But so he writes down Jerry Only's number. I call up Jerry. Jerry says, learn as many songs as you possibly can. When you feel ready, come on up, call me. We'll come up and audition. So I said, all right. I went out and I bought the compilation album, the Misfits compilation album, and boom, I put it on and I heard Horror Business. And it all clicked. I said, this is great. I got this. So I know this is a long story, but it's crazy. So I went up there, I auditioned. It was the night before my 20th birthday. Obviously I hung around for months and months and months after that. Dave Vanian was going to show up. They were trying to get Glenn Danzig. It was this whole thing. They put out a public call in newspapers. People showed up from all over the world, not only just in America, to sing with Jerry and Doyle. And then so October is approaching, and the Misfits have to make a decision. They're either going to relaunch as a band on Halloween, or they're going to have to wait another year before they do so, because they're the Misfits. You got to come back on Halloween. But they didn't have a singer. They had me, but they didn't have the singer. They hadn't made a commitment to me. So at the time, Typo Negative, who's from Brooklyn, New York, part of the New York hardcore scene, very, very popular at the time, were headlining. They were headlining the Roseland Ballroom in New York City, and called up the Misfits and said, "Why don't you guys come out during our encore set in front of 5,000 people, do a couple of songs, relaunch? It'll be great. People go nuts." So the Misfits go, "Yep, let's do that. But we don't have a singer. Do you think that Pete Steele will sing?" And Pete says, "Yeah, I'll sing for you guys, but I don't know any of the songs." So the Misfits guys call me up and they say, "Hey, do you want teach Pete Steele these Misfit songs? I'm like, of course I do. I'm a huge Typo Negative fan. I was a huge Typo Negative fan. Went to every show. I actually gave Pete Steele a demo tape of my band a few years before this all happened. So I'm standing there in Brooklyn with Pete and the band, and we're playing, and I'm singing the songs, and I'm teaching him, and he stops everything. And Pete says, "This is crazy. This is your singer." He said, "This kid is great. He sings these songs better than anybody. Certainly me." He said, "This is your singer. You got to come out with him." And he went and he started doing some other stuff. And so that's how I got into the band, was Pete Steele saying, "This is your singer. This is it." And so we went out on that night in Roseland, New York, and we rocked it, and we launched the Resurrection tour, and we hit it hard. It was 1994 coming into 1995. We did the Resurrection tour. That's how I got into the Misfits.
Dude, that's I'm glad you shared that story. I didn't know that. That's sweet, man.
I know it's
Pete
long,
Steele.
but
No,
the long version is awesome.
it is, man. I mean, I loved it, man. I was getting goosebumps listening to it.
And it made it so remarkable, because I want to stress again to you what a huge Typo Negative fan I was. Like, I was a huge Typo Negative fan. I loved Life of Agony. Like, I loved the New York hardcore scene. And all of a sudden, my hero, like, I'm standing in the room with, like, my hero, and I'm teaching him songs, and he stops everything. It was amazing. God bless Pete Steele, man. We stayed in contact and communication all the way up to the time that he passed away. And it's getting around the time that he did pass. Wow. Yeah, Pete Steele, big stupid angel from Brooklyn.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's like getting the blessing from the Godfather, that, you're
Yeah.
the guy, that's awesome. So, what was that like then? You got basically kind of anointed, and you started going out on tour. For the old school hardcore fans, was there a lot of like, flack for like, the Glenn Danzig groups, or, what was it like filling, that position?
There was always that. There was always, especially in the beginning, the kooky eye. But it was more of a it felt more like an initiation. I didn't feel like people were showing up to get me and specifically hurt me. Well, there actually there was some, but it was more like an initiation into this world that I had stepped into, and it was a very violent world. Pun intended and no pun intended. It was a very violent world, and it was up to me, and I was being tested to be able to stand not only in the middle of it and be able to deal with the whirlwind of it, but to somehow be able to orchestrate it and control it in some sort of way. And it was very, very mind-blowing for me that because I just thought I was just going to have to sing and do some moves and look cool. But when I started to learn about how important the Misfits were to American punk rock and to European punk rock and to punk rock at large, and how the Misfits as a band influenced present day music, and at the time these huge amazing artists like Rob Zombie, Metallica, Marilyn Manson, all these great bands that would point to the Misfits and go, yeah, this is, they're the quintessential, they're legendary. So here I am in the middle of all this, and most of the Misfits lore at the time was just legend. Everybody had said, "Oh yeah, I saw the Misfits back in the 80s," and it's the Misfits played like a handful of shows, and it was the fact that there were a couple of shows that had been bootlegged and some really famous clips of these guys that everybody had seen. So everybody had this idea in their head that it was just supposed to be like this all-out riot when they went to Misfit shows. And so that's what it was, especially in the beginning in the Resurrection tour. It was just, I mean, you know, there were still real skinhead factions, like real skinheads that would show up in America as well as in Europe, and there were still real, you know, what you would call like real punk rock, you know, punk rockers. And there was as well, there was still the political beefs and all of that that was happening. That was the backdrop of us now coming into it and all the politics of that, because there was this resurgence in the mid 90s of, you know, you had of like the Sex Pistols and all these bands reforming. And we didn't want to be seen like that. Like, and we didn't want to be seen like that. We didn't want to just be seen as capitalizing on the Glenn Danzig music. We wanted to be taken serious as a real band.
Yeah. And then, like, so dealing with politics and all that's nothing new to you. You dealt with it even back then, getting involved. But how long do you think it took
Sure.
before you were like, you know, you felt like you were an equal part of the new, you know, you were the Misfits, you know,
After
creating
the
it.
success of American Psycho, I knew that I was being tested, and I knew that there was a lot of eyes on me, and there was a lot of pressure on me, like a quarterback of the team, to be able to artistically, really artistically direct, because I was the strongest writer of the bunch, in my opinion. And so after the success of American Psycho, and after we were able to pull that record together and it was so well received, that's when I said, all right, I don't have to prove, you know, I've already proved these things, that I'm worthy. I've gotten the nod from all of these quintessential artists giving me the thumbs up. I walked out on stage with Manson. I walked out on stage with Rob Zombie. I walked out on stage with the guys from Metallica. I sang Green Hell and Die Die My Darling with the guys from Metallica. Like, I got, you know, I kissed the fucking ring.
Yeah.
So I'm good to go after American Psycho, you know. So then I knew that proving now was proving what a great performer I could be. I stepped into that part with Famous Monsters. So I gotta be a profound performer, like when you see somebody like Freddie Mercury, and you're just like, oh my god, you know, how can you touch that? You know, or you see a great performance by somebody like Jim Morrison.
Yeah. Now, and like so when you got in and now you're you know, you're putting out these albums and you knew you like made it. I mean, some of those hits went on to be some of the biggest hits of the entire Misfits careers too under you.
Yeah, almost 100 million views of a video like Dig Up Her Bones over the past 25, 26 years. That's a lot. Yeah, for sure. The songs that I wrote, you know, again, like a song like Dig Up Her Bones I wrote when I was 16 years old. Um so yeah. Yeah. I knew that I was the strongest writer. I knew that, and that's why you know, and that's why those records sounded so good, because we were able to identify while we were making those records, as a great team does. Everybody had brought different greatness to the table. You know, the things that I did great, there were other things that I didn't do very well, and you had somebody like Chud that would be able to do those things well. And Doyle on his own was just, you know, he was an incredible writer, and the riffs that he would come up with, and the ideas and the breaks. And Jerry too. Jerry only is one of the greatest, like, intro, break, and ending guys in the whole world. And just the way that it all came together when it did, when we were working in the studio, was just a beautiful, brilliant magical, wonderful thing that at the time, unfortunately, I didn't even recognize that it was. Only now and then I would recognize that it was happening, because I was a cynical asshole. So years later, when I reflect back on it, I'm like, wow, we were really awesome. We were really awesome in that way.
Yeah. And then how did your relationship with like, Jerry and Doyle develop over the time period?
Well, Jerry, um, Jerry and I, there was always a little bit of distance between Jerry and I because it was a pretty big age gap, and Jerry was very much like the father figure to everybody. So I was this, and Jerry as well. He was married. He had two kids that were they weren't young, nor they weren't very old either. Like 7 and 9, something like that. I was single. I was just out of high school. I was just a couple years out of high school. So there was it was hard to bridge the gap with Jerry in all the things that were happening in my life. Um, but Jerry was like, to me, again, he was like a father figure. He was um he was Uncle Mo. Doyle and I became fast buddies because we were much more apt to, sit around and watch cartoons or play Nintendo and work out and write and hang out and do stuff like that. And as well as Chud, we had more in common on that sort of level. But again, all of those personalities and the way that we interacted with one another created this incredible dynamic as a band because we had such different relationships with each other. Um, so yeah, I was hard to handle back then. I look back on myself now. And I look in the view mirror at myself, and I'm just like, I want to get to myself and say, "What are you doing?" I was wildly emotional, and it was just crazy times. It was
Well,
crazy
like you said,
times.
you're fresh out of high school, and then you get this gig, and then you're out. Probably, you know, you never experienced the world before, so these some of the a couple of those guys already had that experience, and
I'll tell
you
you what
know,
that's also important to my story. In these times as well, I started to look around me. Now, there was a time where I was in my life, like for example, Howard Stern's after party in his first movie. I went. I remember seeing the guys from Alice in Chains, and again, I remember seeing Twiggy Knight from Marilyn Manson used to hang out, and it was like that. And I'm looking around, and I'm living this life, and in a lot of ways, I still feel the same. And so I started saying to myself, I'm looking at all my musical heroes, and these guys are a mess. These guys are a mess. There's drugs, there's alcohol, there's sex, there's, demonic worship. It's just insane. Like, it's insane. And I say, you know, you start to look back, and one of the things that all these guys have in common that I look to that are like my heroes, rock and roll heroes, they all go on a blaze of glory. They all die. It's just like this long list of dead people. And then you start to say to myself, well, maybe that's it. Maybe at the crossroads that you sell yourself to the devil. And that's kind of, you got to go down that path and surf that wave and it might crash over you, but you have to. So I start thinking to myself, well, maybe that's the kind of lifestyle that I should lead. And I'm saying, so there was a lot of that introspection going on with me because I I didn't get into music to be famous. I didn't like the attention. I didn't want the attention. One of the reasons I didn't talk to the media in the beginning is because I didn't have anything to say. And I was speaking through my music. And, you know, all the great, remember how Guns N' Roses were dragged through the media. And I remember how cynical all the rock stars were of the media and what they would do to them and how they would. So I was always like very standoffish. So during those famous Monster years and before the whole breakup, there was a lot of that going on. I was truly at the crossroads in those days.
Yeah. And that's kind of bringing us up to like more current things. Like, so you mentioned the breakup too. Like, when was it where you guys were like, okay, this ship is sailed. This is time to call this quits. And then you went out and started doing your own thing.
Well, the first time we broke up was actually before Famous Monsters. It was during the South America tour when Mike Hideous came and sang for the band. But I knew that it was done on the tour that we did break up. There was just, and again, in looking back, perhaps there was a different way. There was definitely a different way I could have gone about it, and maybe should have. But I was so unhappy. I was so unhappy, and I was so lost, and I was hurting so bad inside. I didn't have anybody to talk to, like really talk to and turn to and say, "Hey, this is what's going on in my heart. This is what's going on in my head. Like, I need help. I don't know where I am. I'm in this crazy world and there's nobody I can call." My family was a mess. I couldn't, it's not like I could call up my dad or even my mom. There was nobody for me. And so I did a lot of passive aggressive shit that caused problems. And then when those problems happened, I, I was like the saboteur. It was like I had the IED, and I would come into these situations and I would just blow them up and be like, and there was a reason for that. And it was because of, I was immature, and because of my emotions, and because I was in this world that was killing me and I had nobody in it. And so I really believed that I was going to die. I really believed that I was starting to think maybe I would kill myself just to make it all stop, as well as, say, finally be able to communicate to everybody how bad I was hurting. And I said, I ain't doing that. I'm not doing that. Again, I'm standing at the crossroads, and I said, I'm going to go home, because again, I didn't get into music for fame or for money or for any of those things. And so I said, I'd rather go home back to Seaside Heights and be poor and no one ever know who I am, than to feel this way and to be on this hellish ride. And there was nobody there to say, don't do it, or what's happening with you. Everyone was just going, all right, go ahead. See ya. So I left and I went home.
And you felt in your heart, like, this isn't the life I chose. You knew that there was a line you weren't going to cross with in your soul, basically.
I was scared. I was scared. I was angry. I was lost, and I didn't know what to do. I was hoping that by my actions, like a child, it was a very immature thing, that by my actions and saying, well, I'm just going to go home, that Jerry or Kenny or these guys that were talking about, all of the somebody would step up and in the hierarchy and say, this is crazy. This is crazy. We're one of the biggest rising, most popular bands in the country. We're selling, it's like we won a lottery ticket. We just got to keep it together. You don't have to like each other. What is wrong with you? Are you okay? What can I do to help? Why are you acting like this? Why are you mad? Why are you angry? What is going on? I love you. Nobody said those things at the end. In the beginning, it was different. It was all for one for all. But it got to a point where everybody just got scattered. And I was very young. I was very, very young. On tour with bands like Megadeth. It was like big stuff. And I didn't even know how big it was. And so to me, it was just easy to say, I'm out, because I don't want to die. I don't want to die. And I feel like there's a gun to my head, and I'm the one that has it to my head, because I couldn't control. It was just insane. It was insane. Um, and so I made the decision to go home and walk away from it.
And then you go home and you kind of like get a chance to like reset, get healthy, get your health back. Um, I guess when was it that you were like, okay, but music is still my thing. Music is my passion. It's part of me. When did you start doing your own stuff then?
Music was, thank God, it was always there for me. Music was always there. I did a lot of surfing back then, so in between sets, I would just sit out on the ocean, and I had hair, I had like long blonde hair at the time, and I would surf a lot, and in between sets, I would just hear stuff in my head, and I always started writing, and even coming out of the Misfits, the stuff that I wrote for Famous Monsters, I wrote tons and tons of music for Famous Monsters that we didn't use for the record. It just didn't fit. So I had this huge cache of music that eventually became Web of Dharma with Graves, and Chud and I did it. But I'll tell you, you know, when I went home in 2000, approaching 2001, my life just got even more challenging. And again, it's a long, it would take many, I don't think we want to get into the minutia of it, but I went home and there's just stories of, you know, loss and tragedy in my life, and just the very, very, very difficult things all the way through. And I'm not saying that I'm a victim. I'm just saying that my life became very, very tumultuous. When I got home, it just seemed I couldn't keep anything underneath my feet. I had lost all my money, had lost all my friends. I was going to marry this girl. This is what started it off. And if I'm running long, just let me know.
No, we got plenty of time, man.
So I go home from the Misfits, and again, like I said, at some point the money runs out, and people stop calling me. It's the same story. No, I had this girl, and I was going to marry her, and it just fell apart. I wind up back up at my mom's house, and it's awful. So my mom and her friend decide, they see, oh, Michael's he's so sad and stuff, and this lady, we grew up with her and her daughters, and so they get this idea. They say, well, let's hook up Michael and this lady's daughter. And so we hear about it. We're just like, oh man, because we're like brothers and sisters, and I hadn't seen her in years and years and years and years and years. So we hang out, and it's cool. We start talking and stuff, and she's studying, and she's going to be a marine biologist, and she's down in like the Bahamas, and I'm this ocean guy as well. Like I spent more time back then in the water than out of the water. And long story short, so we hang out, we have this amazing time. We have this amazing time with one another. It's incredible. And, we give it, she's going to go back down south, and, I'm going to stay here, and things are going to look up, and we're going to talk. It's great. She goes back down to the Bahamas, and like a couple of weeks later, I hear that she hangs herself in the boat that she's living in. So, it's stuff like that. It wasn't too long after that my friends were murdered in Toms River, New Jersey. Right before, as we were rehearsing for it was like the first or second Graves tour, and it was just this, and then the towers fall in New York City, so it's just this like, it's like this nuclear bomb has gone off in my life, and so after Graves, after we started writing the music for Graves and touring with Graves and Web of Dharma, and that fell apart. All of that rage was a perfect, Gotham Road was a perfect vessel to put all of that into. And when I first heard that music, I knew that we were going to make it into something, because it sounded like how I felt.
Wow. Damn, man. And so there was so much that I heard in there. And I was like, part of me was like relating to, especially like, you know, where my life was at. Like I've almost felt like I'm listening to like a lead, and I'm about to comment after, because it's like, oh man, I felt this, around 9/11, like so much just negativity happened and stuff. But
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about like that. You went through all that personal stuff with those people that you were close to, but then as an American too, 9/11 happened. How did that you know uh contribute to, your
It was
writing or
it
your
was
just
it was
your processing?
that operation, what happened in 9/11, which and the official narrative of 9/11 is absolutely untrue. But in when it happened, it was the perfect trigger for someone like me because I had nothing. There was this huge void in my life. And so what was happening to me, I was very malleable. So when the focus of the country became, oh my God, we're under attack. And it's like that B signal went out that goes out across a society when they're threatened. That's why fear is so often used, and it's such a powerful weapon.
Yeah.
I got angry. Again, where I was living in my mom's house, I could see the smoke. I could see the smoke. And my mom, who worked in Mahwah, New Jersey, there's a part of Route 17 when you're coming Route 17 south where I got the idea for Gotham Road and the imagery of Gotham Road. You come up over the high part of the mountains over there, the Mahwah Mountains, and you could look down on the city. And my mother loved this skyscraper, and she wanted me to paint a picture for her. And I always said, yeah, I'm going to. Yeah, I'm going to. And she came home that day crying because as she came up over that hill and saw that, you could just see the smoke coming out of the towers of the beautiful city that, my mom grew up in the Bronx. My family's from New York, My brother was in the city at that time. It made me angry. It made me angry. It made me feel like I had to defend myself, my family, and the deeper core values of my country and my religion, just like everybody else. It was just like on, and I had lost everything. So it was it was the perfect recruiting tool for somebody like me to take action.
And then so what kind of action did you end up taking?
So I began to write and speak out about culture, about politics, about I supported the war in the beginning, and I eventually decided to join the military because I didn't see that there was any future in music for me, because Gotham Road in 2003, 2004, we started to get popular, but that's the same time that I started to really speak out. That's when I helped found conservativepunk.com. That's when the presidential election in the United States, John Kerry and Bush, and there was huge amounts of money being poured into leftist musical outlets and organizations. One large chunk of money fell into the hands of Mike, Fat Mike from NoFX, and they started something called punkvoter.com. That's what really triggered me. In the midst of all this, here comes punkvoter.com. Punkvoter.com said that their mission was to organize and to sign up to vote, register to vote, like 500,000 kids, to 500,000 18 to 24-year-old people to vote in a block for Democrats across the board. And I said, well, that's, what about the other side? Like there's nobody representing anybody with, say, any sort of conservative values or contrary debate. There's none of that. And so I thought that because it was such a young audience. And because in order to really get into the substance of things like economic policy, energy policy, foreign policy, domestic policy, things like that, you can't just paint a broad brush. There has to be a high resolution conversation, facts. There has to be an intellectual debate with contrary views in order to suss it out. So I reached out to Punk Voter. I said all of these things. And I said that there's some people that agree with me, that love you guys. They love this band. They love that band. They love this. But if you do this, you are going to divide a community. You're going to divide a community. And someday, just like I saw in the Misfits, we're going to meet each other on the streets and it's not going to be fucking pretty. Just like it was in the Misfits. I saw some bad stuff happen between real white supremacists and ordinary people, like real white supremacists that would stop and Zeke Kyle and do the whole thing, like for real. The cops showing up, and so I said that, and they didn't care. They just said, "Go pound sand," and I said, "Well, I'm gonna say this as loud as I possibly can." And so that's what I did. I started to write, and I started to go on media and started to make my voice known. And I got banned and I got canceled and I got blacklisted. I got run out of music. Nobody wanted to talk to me. Nobody would talk to me. The New York Times published an article. I had a big European tour with Gotham Road and an American tour, and it got canceled. The European promoters all sent this letter saying that they're not going to support my views and they're not going to give me a platform and no magazine should. And so everybody stopped talking to me. There was nothing I could do. What was I going to do? I was a pariah.
And see, yeah, now we're getting to like, I mean, one of the main things I wanted to get you on about and stuff too, to give you an outlet, because, I'm like you, man, I'm down for like, let's have that conversation. It's like having a conversation is not even like allowed anymore. And it's like, that's where they've been good. They've infiltrated, like, the left has got so many hooks in the media, so many hooks in, the schools, so many hooks in the unions and stuff like that. And it's like, and they were smart to get that, punk voter thing and kind of like, okay, I mean, in the music world and stuff too, it's just like, that's been their angle, but they not allowing the conversation. You're trying to do the right thing and have the conversation. It seems like all media has like a left lean. It's not just on the big TV either. I mean, I read an article that you were involved with Metal Sucks, about cancel culture, and just taste the guy's left leaning, spin on everything that you had to say. And he was like, here's one of the quotes from it. Still, it's not difficult to understand why someone would assume Graves is a racist. There's the above photo, as well as one in which Graves proudly poses with InfoWars' Alex Jones. His open support of Donald Trump. Unconfirmed but not far-fetched reports that Graves was vocally against the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests and his affiliation with the Proud Boys, who have been labeled a white nationalist hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. And wouldn't membership in such a group alone qualify Graves for cancellation? I mean, right. I was reading that. I was just like, are you freaking kidding me? It's like, I've had, the opportunity and pleasure to meet some of the Proud Boys, and I just see a group of men trying to hold other men accountable and lift them up to a higher standard. I donated to some of the drives for like winter coats and stuff like that and the fundraising. Right. It's like the media has taken everything good and made it evil, Yeah.
And a quote like that's on the assumption of all that Media Matters or Southern Poverty Law Center. They not only don't have any sort of authority, but they've been outed and they're clearly a biased organization. And you can go down the rabbit hole with something like the SPLC and where they get their money from and what their agenda is. And then as well, that's under the assumption that Alex Jones is a racist. And so what reality is very contrary to all of those things. But that's the spell. That's the
Yeah.
spell, and that's the evil that we face. That, and it's the same spirit, and it's the same evil, and it's the same spell that, for example, what happened in our tiny baby born country in the 1600s, the Salem witch trials. It's that same thing, that this delusion, the delusion that some people live under, that there's this alternate reality that's created by, like you said, it's created by the media, it's created by the outlets, and the people, the pundits, the analysts, the folks that are responsible for putting information out there in our three-dimensional world, so that we are able to, with our receptors, our ears, our eyes, and with our discernment, to get all of that information that has to be truth. You can't manipulate truth. Socrates said, those who control, those who tell the stories control society. So you can raise your child to believe that the toaster in the corner is God, like they do in North Korea. They believe that Kim Jong-un actually makes the sun rise and fall, because if you don't have contrary information, well, then how is it that you can then prove your bias? And so when you have what's happened now over the past 50 years, with just a total, complete overtaking of all media outlets on a military level, now we are just fed propaganda, and it's taken hold of people who've been damaged, chemically, environmentally, psychologically, psychically, spiritually. And and that's why there's bombs going off in Ukraine right now, and we're facing off with Russia, because it's all of that is part of the military operation that is being rolled out against mankind.
And key word that you said that I strongly agree with is discernment. People today don't. I mean, the media counts on you just being lazy and not, following the money, like you said, with some of those groups. Okay, we'll see the Southern Poverty Law, whatever. Who funds it? Follow the money. What agenda are they pushing? Nobody wants to do their homework or do any work. Nobody, I mean, every morning, man, I'm just like, I'm a spiritual guy. I'm in recovery. I start my day, trying to turn my will and life over to God, and I pray for discernment. I pray for the blinders to come off. I pray to try and, I used to be more in the middle type guy, but life and the way everything's kind of been crazy, it's like I feel I'm getting pushed more farther and farther to one side, But what I've really liked is you being, standing your ground and speaking out despite all the flaming arrows that have kind of been shot at you, and the cancel culture and the cancellation and everything. And I've liked watching, I'm live here in Ohio. I've been good friends with Frank Kavanaugh, a mutual friend of ours, like seeing you guys on InfoWars doing the heavy metal thing, talking, sharing what's going on. And it's just yeah, I don't know, man. I just been huge. That's another reason why I wanted to get you on here to talk about like what you've personally been experienced, a victim of this cancel culture mentality, and how you're still standing strong and fighting for truth.
I've always had a relationship with God, and Jesus has always been with me. And that's why I had such tumult right before I left the Misfits, because broad is the road, narrow is the path, right? So there's a few who seek that narrow road and are able to walk it, because you have to come to terms with yourself and realize what and who you are. and by what we are, we're flesh, and we all have an expiration date. And so then if we believe that there's something more, and I always believed that there was something more, and that's why it didn't make sense to me. My flesh wants all of these things. My flesh wants drugs. My flesh wants alcohol and sex and all of those models and those hot chicks that I could have, and all of those things. My flesh wants the lights and and to see myself in the magazines, but that doesn't make me comfortable, and that never made me whole. And so then it started to make sense to me about seeking treasure in heaven and not in this world. And it's hard to not follow my heart. It's hard for all of us to not follow our hearts, because above all things, the heart's deceitful, and it's beyond redeemable. And so that means that we're broken. Our heart, no matter what we do, it's a human heart, and it's deceitful above all things, scripture says, above all things. And so we can't trust that heart. And so what do? That's where discernment comes in. But there's a trick to that, right? In order for us to receive that discernment, we have to have a relationship with God. We have to accept first that we're sinful, and we have to repent our sins and say, oh man, I got to change. I got to give all these things over. I can't follow my heart, because my heart's going to, land me with a shotgun in my mouth and a kilo of cocaine next to me. So you got to give all those things over. And when you do, and when I did that, discernment, then through repentance and giving my life over to Jesus, and once again, claiming publicly that I believe that he is who he is and who he was and what he did for me. And that's when discernment comes, Lord, with us that we need, right?
Amen. Yeah. And like, it sounded like, even back, I don't know where you were, like, spiritually when you made the decision to leave the Misfits, but it sounds like conviction. It sounds like, the Holy Spirit was convicting you that this is not where you.
Yeah, I had enough discernment that the Lord was saying to me that you are not ready for this, that perhaps you're not ready, because you are all over the place right now. You have taken, it was like I took my treasure and I left the farm, like the prodigal son. Yeah. And I was laying down with the pigs, and I was becoming a pig. And I had to, and like that young man did, he stood up and said, I will arise and go. And that's what I did. And I didn't even know that I was doing it. It wasn't like I was making some, I didn't make some big statement like, I am going to change my life and give it to God. I just knew that I had to get on a different wave. And I had been pushed to a point to really look at myself and stand at those crossroads where the devil is. They say that he's in a nice suit. He comes as somebody that looks very familiar and speaks in a nice voice. Money and boats. Oh, the women, bro. The women. Oh my God. You know what I'm saying? Like, anything and everything is a phone call away. But what does a man gain if he gains the whole world and loses his soul in the process, right?
Yeah.
And so those were heavy things for me that I had to swallow, and it was a very, very different. And that's why Damian Echols to me was a blessing, to be able to be in that world and to learn all the things that I did learn, and and so I always, even now, obviously much more profoundly, I seek treasure in heaven and not here on earth, and I don't worry about things so much, like that. I just try to make the world a better place for my children, for my fans. The ability to have such meaningful interactions with people it's an amazing thing.
Yeah. Now, you just touched on, you mentioned Damian Echols from the West Memphis Three and stuff. You care to elaborate a little bit about?
Some parts of the Christian community hate this because they really haven't been briefed on it all. In the early 90s, Damian, Jason, just three West Memphis, Arkansas teenagers were blamed for the horrible murder of three young boys, and it was said to be a satanic ritual killing. And the trial that happened was just a terrible sham trial, and the evidence was a forced confession by a neurologically deficient young man who didn't know that he was making a confession the way that he did. He just wanted to go home. It was like textbook forced confession type stuff. All three of these men are free today. There was never any real evidence that tied them together. For example, when the trial opened up in Arkansas in the 90s, the first thing that the prosecution entered into evidence and was serious about it was that there was a full moon the night the boys were killed. So Damian Echols was sentenced to death, and was on death row for many, many, many years. And I came across a book that he had read after I saw a movie that HBO had produced called Paradise Lost about his case. And I reached out to Damian, I reached out to his wife, and I wanted to help them. I wanted to help them, and I wanted to help other less fortunate people that had been lost in our justice system, and maybe they didn't have enough money for a lawyer or didn't have an HBO documentary made for them,
I'm listening. I got to grab something real quick.
Yeah, sure. So that's what I did. I reached out and started writing letters back and forth with Damian, and we came up with the idea to do this creative project together, which became him and I writing these songs that I eventually recorded and released. It was called Illusions. And again, a lot of the Christian community got mad at me because of the whole devil thing, and because it had to do with children who had been murdered, and I found that there was a lot of ignorance. And even now, I have a podcast on Censored TV that I do. I call it a Barncast. And I covered it, and I was talking about it because even to this day there's updates to the case and there's things happening, and I just got a lot of email and communication like, oh, how can you call yourself a Christian and what, advocate for somebody's life and dignity? I don't know. I don't know. It's horrible. It's a horrible thing to do.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes the biggest I guess roadblock for any person that's like searching and looking for a relationship like we have, and having faith is the Christians themselves, Sometimes they get in their own way, and
Yeah, for sure.
So
definitely.
But yeah, I just, when you were talking about, like your journey and your declaration with your faith, and then you mentioned, Damian Echols, I'm like, well, what role did he play in that? That's why I wanted you to elaborate a little bit on that.
Well, because I imagine myself in Damian's shoes. When we started to write together, when he would send me lyrics, he would describe what he was going through and what it was like to be in a concrete cell for so many years, and to have to sit there and really examine your mortality, where there's an expedited clock against you, where the state is going to kill you. You're going to be killed. There's people looking to kill you, and you're hated, and your eyesight's going, and there's physical impairments, and there's spiritual impairments. So I was putting myself in that place of darkness, and we were communicating and reaching each other on a very human level, and I had never experienced anything like that. And as I read more and gotten involved a little bit with the organizations like the Innocence Project, I learned a lot about the American justice system and how messed up it is and how it really is. Those are my ducks. Sorry.
Your ducks in a row.
And how it really is in this case in the American South. There's a lot of poor, especially poor Black people that were just lost in the system, sometimes left to die in prisons, and there was not a lot of advocating for them, especially in the community that I was in, again, like the horror punk community. And so that, basking in that type of darkness helped me recognize the light a lot more, and find comfort in a God, an all creating, all powerful God that loves all of us. And I was doing projects like that at the time because I wanted to, as I do today, I want to lead by example. I was hoping that the other people in this horror punk genre community of bands and artists would follow suit and say, well, Michale Graves from the Misfits, he's doing all these things. He's using his artistic abilities, his talents to serve the community and serve people and serve humanity. Maybe we should do the same. Maybe there should be this human element to it, not just ghosts and monsters and, how scary we can look on stage. But fortunately, that really didn't happen. Everybody just calls me a Nazi and a racist, and
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, too, I remember, with that particular situation, too, it seemed like more of the musicians and stuff that got recognized for getting involved with that. It was more like a self-serving type thing, It's just like, yeah, we're kind of bringing attention to this, but it's like we're bringing attention to us too,
Yeah, I'll be honest with you guys, like Eddie Vedder and what's his name? Johnny
Depp.
Johnny Depp. Those dudes definitely need to be commended, especially Eddie Vedder. Eddie Vedder and Johnny Depp did a lot of stuff behind the scenes that nobody knows about that was just a really beautiful human thing, and really helped those guys. So that definitely needs to be, those guys need to be commended for sure.
That's good. Now, I wanted to ask too, you see the sign in the background. I know it's kind of like your thing with your fans, but you want to talk a little bit about the Gravediggers Union?
Sure. Gravediggers Union. It was a funny thing that we came up with in Graves. Back in the early 2000s, it was the Gravediggers. Like, oh, they dig graves. Get it? It's they dig graves and they dig Michale Graves. So it's just the fan club. It's just another way to it's the banner that we put things under, that I guess is through the filter of people that are really, really into the band and into what I'm doing. And yeah, it's just the ongoing fan club. The 1119 thing people always ask about. And the short version of that is, when I was young, weird shit used to happen to me. I used to have like these outer body experiences, sleep paralysis. One night I woke up, I was young, I don't know, 8, 9, something like that. I woke up and I remember like floating above my bed, and I could see the alarm clock down below, and it was 11:19 p.m. And so that number is like, it reoccurs. It's a reoccurring number in my life. I see
like
it
people with the
a lot.
11:11 type thing, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Gotcha. And then kind of like going back like to what we were just talking about, because I wanted to ask you this as well, is like, what happened? I mean, you were there around the time of like, with getting dubbed by, getting anointed by Peter Steele, and you were there in the New York hardcore, you're around the punk scene. I mean, you played in that. What happened to our punk and hardcore scene where it was like anti-government, anti the man, anti this, and then today it's just like, you know, if you want to come to
I'll
our
tell you.
show, you can't be anti-vax or
I'll
whatever,
tell
you
you.
know?
Because sometime in the 90s, in the early 90s, as cultural things and societal large societal things started to happen, you know, a lot of people started to move out of the cities and into the suburbs. There was a huge societal thing happening. So the punk rock movement, both in America and in Europe, both came out of the cities. And it was always working class people. It came out of a working class ethic, family, friends, respect, working hard, pulling up your bootstraps, going to work, solving your own problems, not relying on government, not relying on anything else but yourself and your family, your friends, and your virtue, the things that you have. That's what the New York hardcore scene still is and was back then. But what happened to punk rock was after, you know, after it really kind of died in the cities, right? And it became, you know, the days of Guns N' Roses and stuff like that. That punk rock aesthetic became mainstream, but with the onset of grunge, it was connected to punk rock. But the message that was being given by that was, you just have to be mediocre. Remember, like punk rock, you don't even have to, oh, your guitar's not tuned. You guys suck. Oh, it's punk rock. Oh, I'm not going to get out of bed till 2:00. My hair's all messy and I don't care about anything. Punk rock. Like that was never it. That was never it at all. It was always work hard, push back against a fascist communist government, liberty and freedom. Those are the things that we have to strive for. Acceptance of other people, acceptance of mutant creatures, the misfits of the dregs of society. That's where we all met up with punk rock. But that's where that split happened. So hardcore looks and is much more like punk rock is naturally. Even the politics of it, where then punk rock itself became this lazy fascist in and of itself, because all the militant political parts of you know, the fascist things that were in the white supremacist part of everything, the Nazi part of the things in the 80s that were pushed out of punk rock and beaten, and all of those things started to seep into all of the communications and the magazines, the zines, and the music as well. And so punk rock became this very angry, horrible. It became Antifa. That's what I had been saying. That's what I had been saying back then, and all through it, saying that this is what's going to happen. You're going to create something. I didn't call it Antifa back then, but you're going to create Antifa. And then the people that are like the New York, the hardcore type, people, the conservative, we're going to meet on the streets, and it's not going to be pretty. So then you have something like Antifa, Proud Boy, if you will, the two opposite ends of the spectrums all these years later, just as I fucking said.
Yeah, because no one wanted to come to the table and have conversation.
Right. And I said, if we don't do that, people are going to get hurt and people are going to die. I seen back in the day in Detroit, a bunch of white skinheads, the riot broke out at this show, and these skinheads had took this young kid's face. Doyle and I were running past them, and we saw it, and they were rubbing this kid's face on the sidewalk, rubbing like grinding his face. It was like a horror movie. So again, like when people in real time, whether it's my ex-bandmates or any of these lunatic beta male fools that call themselves journalists, metal journalists or punk journalists, when they call me a racist, or he might be racist, I've fought more Nazis than I could remember. Literally fought them. So I'm not a racist or a white supremacist or any of these stupid things that they think that I've become the symbol of.
That's like they're, like reach in. I have no way to argue or debate this person. So reach in bag. Okay, you're this ism or that ist, or, we're just going to throw a label on you, and that tried to shut down the conversation because no one wants to keep, having that like spotlight put on. Most people will be like, all right, and just shut up because they don't want to face that, but we have to stand up and say, no, that is not who I am. I mean, we got a place here called Speak in Tongues. I remember being at a show, it was a DIY punk show, and all of a sudden these dudes start jumping the middle of the pit and they start zig heiling, and we weren't having it, man. We had them up on the friggin' stage. I'm pulling suspenders and letting them snap back on. It was just like there was none of that. But now, I went and served my country. I try and be a man with some values and raise my family right. I've got, approaching 13 years of sobriety. I have faith in Jesus Christ. Oh my goodness. I'm the worst. I must be a racist. I must be this. I must be that. It's like it's bizarro world, man. What's good is bad. It's not just the media, because it's carrying on in the culture, and it scares the hell out of me of what our kids are growing up in right now. But I got to try and lay the foundation, like, today with them, because we have to be able to have discussions. We have to be able to talk.
Yes. And as believers know that the physical battle, the 3-dimensional battle that we're having, the way that we interact with each other physical, and the things that we do and the things that we say, there's also that spiritual battle. The things that are happening now, there's consequences in it just beyond the veil in the spiritual world as well. So people ask, well, what can I do? Anything that you do sends out that psychic signal, that same thing that energy that comes out of you just by trying, just by having the will to do it, and by doing it for the good of your children, for the good of other people's children, for the good, for the light of God, and so that his kingdom, can be here, and we don't have things like war, and we can do things like build escalators to the moon. I don't want my children growing up on a prison planet. I don't want my children growing up with what they currently have planned for our future. I would rather die. Because I know that the righteousness of my life here will carry me over to what's most important, is the salvation of my soul.
Yeah, exactly. And like sitting back and just not speaking up at all is making
100%. If you don't,
you might as well just jump to the other side and run that way, because if you can't, there can't be, in this spiritual battle, you can't be like sitting in the bleachers, man.
If you're alive today and you do not make a choice about which side you're on, you still have made a choice. And it says in scripture that the Lord will vomit those type of people out of their mouth. You can't just sit in the middle, right? You just can't sit in the middle and be apathetic.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of like, part of my reasoning why I do this podcast. I try and give everybody a platform, but at the same time, it's just like, I know where my roots are. And if I don't sit and say anything or try and give other people an opportunity to get words out there, what have I done? It's like, I'm retired military. I raised my right hand, and it wasn't just I'm just going over there to help white people. No, right. I was for all Americans, all people, and now it's like, after that time with time and having children of my own, and it's like, I want the good in the world to grow and spiritually, and I want to believe in that great awakening, that we're all going to come to paradise together,
Absolutely.
But it's like you mentioned earlier, which, I definitely wanted to cover with you too before we get ready to wrap up, is, you mentioned be willing to walk that narrow path, which, happens to be the name of your upcoming tour, which I want to give you opportunity to plug and talk about. But, if you want for our audience, explain more too, like why you chose that name and what that name means to you for the tour.
I chose that name because I feel like we're at a point in time where people have to make a decision. When obviously we hope that, as my mom would say, cooler heads will prevail. We are as close to destruction as on a planetary level than we've ever been. And so there's a personal side of why I called it the Narrow Path Tour, so that people would then ask me that and I can tell them my testimony. Well, let me tell you how I've gotten on the narrow path. I thought that as well, again, with what I've been through in the past, what a lot of people have been through in the past couple of years with my band leaving me and you know, the type of people that are now in my circle. I thought it's a reflection of my life as well, the Narrow Path tour. So it's an acoustic tour. It's almost, oh God, I don't know how many performances it is. It's between 40 and 50 performances, mostly private shows, because of all the cancellations and the difficulties that I have being hated and being the symbol of all things that liberals love to hate. I had to be innovative and stay one step ahead. And so for many years now, I've gotten myself to this place where I have, and it's growing. It's amazing where I'm able to do these private shows where I literally, I go to people's houses. I show up at people's houses, and sometimes in their backyard, sometimes in their basement, sometimes in the living room. I do these acoustic shows for them that are incredible. And we sit there, sometimes we talk. There's shows that I put together where there's this whole presentation where I put my makeup on, I transform into the skeleton guy, and I bring you through this whole experience of how I came up with the makeup. And again, and it's like secretly telling my testimony of how I got on that narrow path and how I found God and where I am at today. And then it's celebrated through music. So it's this new, nobody else in the music industry can do this, much less is doing it. So it's this very, very unique, amazingly human thing. Because, like I said, I walk into in people's houses and it's like, this is Grandma and this is Uncle Brian and, that's Aunt Stewart and this is, and the pictures and I really get to meet people and get to know them and hear their story. And so it's just it's an amazing thing, like I said. And 40, 50 performances after all the Chinese flu stuff and all the lockdowns. Like, my industry has been destroyed. There's bands, there's guys that are excited, like, oh, we're gonna go out on tour, we're gonna do 2 dates, 3 dates. Pfft, whatever. We were doing that when we were kids. Here I am able to do 40, 50 dates with just me and my buddy Arturo. Yeah. We do everything ourselves. Everything. It is DIY like you've never seen before.
And yeah, I love the intimacy about it that you just described. But like, after years of being a touring musician before cancel culture, I mean, you had to like have what you thought was a good relationship with some venues that you've played that you used to go through and play.
Yeah.
I mean, how was that at first when you were found out you were no longer welcome, basically?
There's always a part of me that's hurt, that's disappointed, because it doesn't matter what my reputation is or was. I had a great reputation, as well as all the people that I've always traveled with have always been stand-up dudes. They're always respectful. It's always a good time. Everybody's professional. It was always great. But I knew that as things were ramping up, again, this is a kind of old hat for me. 2004 was the first time I got canceled and censored and blacklisted and called racist and Nazis and, that whole thing. but I knew that it was at a different level now, because even though there were some venues and people, promoters, agents that I had relationships with that were put under pressure now, because if they were associated with me, again, I become a symbol of something. There's nothing that anybody could ever point to other than a lifelong dedication to mankind, a duty to my fellow citizens, and always trying to do things out of love and service to people. So these people that I did, they would get pressure from other people, other bands, other opportunities. You know, you're going to work with Michale Graves. We're going to take our business elsewhere. So other people that I knew, obviously, you know, they got families, they got things going on, and they, hey, Michael, this is going to hurt me. I love you, kid, but we got to take 2 steps back. Okay. What am I going to say? You know, I say, and I said to them, I understand. Right now, I need you to stand up for me and say, no, this is not what reality is. Michael is a good guy. Michael is a good guy. He's not a racist. You know, and you know, but I understand. It's and that's what makes me different than most of the people that I've come across, and most to all of the people in this bullshit horror community, whether it's the guys in my ex band or any of those other bands that I've ever touched that have said nothing at all. Because everyone was just silent, and calling me a racist and a Nazi and these things, like, that's my name. Like, I'm a man. My reputation precedes me. There's nothing that anybody could ever point to give any sort of credence, like real world truth, that I'm any of those things. And to my last dying breath, I'll push back against that, because I know what real Nazis are. I've been to Birkenau, Auschwitz. I've read more. I've forgotten more about World War II and the death camps and all the politics and the history of all of those things than most of these fools that are calling me these things have ever known. So, again, you know, for me to just shrink back is just not ever going to happen, because I'm willing to, as people can now plan, I'm willing to lose it all, just like my forefathers, just like my father, my grandfather who fought Nazis, both of them, and their brother who died in World War II, just like all of the brothers like you who have taken the oath to my last dying breath.
Yeah. Yeah, man. And you know, I was just thinking too, it's just like these people not speak. I mean, these people like should, it's why don't they have the courage to speak up that we're associated with you all these years and say, you know what, I know Michael and that's not who he is. People are,
Everybody
they don't want to
ran.
lose their meal ticket. They don't want to lose their whatever. I know so many people that were, like secretly like, hey man, I really like, like we'll say, I was really a big Trump fan, but man, if my bandmates knew that, or my label found out, oh no. So, keep that under or the opposite, the ones that have come out and spoken have been having to deal with the same crap that you've had to deal with just over one,
Lack of courage, lack of conviction. These people, like the guys that used to be in my band, they don't have any sort of moral compass. They don't have that discernment. They don't have the fortitude and are not anchored to things that would then cause them to say, wait a second, I know this guy. He loves us. He loves us. He loves other people. He's dedicated his life. You can't say this about him. I may not agree with him on everything that he says, but you're attacking him. They're making me lower than a dog. They're making it. They were making it like I have to train. When I went back out on the road for the Ameripalooza tour, I literally had to train tactically, offensively, and defensively again with a handgun to protect myself and move in and out of buildings publicly, because it was at that level of threat. I shouldn't have to live like that. I'm in a friggin' band. And again, these people that had ridden my coattails and were with me, guitar players, bass players, drummers, other bands that I worked with and that were helping and that I championed. These guys went silent. And at a critical time, I was being attacked. My family was being attacked. My business was being attacked. Anything that I had ever touched, that was being attacked too. These guys all left. They said, we're out, because they didn't want to get canceled from Facebook. They didn't want to have to, look bad or have a stain on them. Meanwhile, I mean, the things that we had been together and the work that we had over the years, all of these wonderful things that we had created, all of this great stuff that as a community, as a circle of friends, we could have come together and said, look at it, we can't even agree on what we're going to get at McDonald's to get together, but we make it work and say what you want about Michael, call him whatever you want, but you cannot throw a word around like racist or Nazi or bigot or homophobe without any real context or truth. You can't do it. But there was nothing that they were anchored to. And so, and so it was like they poured gasoline on the fire. And once my band members and the people who were a part of my organization, when all those people left, they were like, see, now what are you going to do? Racist, Nazi?
Yeah. It's just like that article that I quoted earlier too. It's just like, oh, he supported this politician. He supported, here he is in a picture with this guy, and we know that this guy is, and it's just ridiculous. It's just, it's why I wanted to get you on so bad, is just to give you an opportunity to share your story, and let the truth be, let those with ears hear, just pray that those that need to hear and are open to hearing, that hearts can be.
I know that most of my audience, most of my fans are men, and between the ages of 20 something and 40 something, most of them. And one of the reasons that I got involved and joined the Proud Boys is, other than I didn't want to overthrow the country with fascist, communist, Marxist, Leninist, view and all the things that they got behind. I knew what the core of the Proud Boys was, and there was goodness there. And I knew that a lot of young guys that perhaps needed to have older mentors, to look up to, other men to fashion themselves out of. That's where I want, and my role still is as a Proud Boy and representing that and that sort of thing. And that's why I talk so much about spirituality. That's why I talk so much about living clean and the things that you can do to live clean. And that's why I speak out, to give people the ability to say, well, look at him. I mean, he's Michale Graves, and hopefully impart strength and maybe a little bit of wisdom and gather as many of these souls at the foot of the cross as I possibly can, so that they can free their minds from the blackness and the darkness and horrible things that happen and become you when you lose that light and when you're lost out there in the wilderness and don't have God in your life. And I think I'm able to speak to it because when you look at pictures of Michale Graves, again, why the Christian community, when I go on these shows and people talk to me, they're like, what? Michale Graves is going to talk about Jesus. Look at this picture of him. What? And I always tell them, what's the point of God putting me out there in a room full of believers? That's easy. That's easy. God sent me into these dark ass places to bring the light. Places where these Christians who are pointing fingers at me, saying how unchristian I am, won't go and and cannot talk to these kids because they laugh at them. Ha ha ha. But not me. I'm able to reach them and show them, in a lot of ways, how Jesus is not only a lamb, but he's a lion, and be able to reach them. And so I'm blessed, and that's why I appreciate coming on your show too. I hope that I impart that on even just one person that'll catch this episode of yours.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. I appreciate that. And there's like, you know, we're still flawed men, you know, try even with when our heart's trying to do the right thing and we pray for God's will and not ours, we're still flawed. And that's why it's good to surround ourselves with other men that are trying and striving for the right thing and accountability. You know, I need accountability every day in my life, man. You
We
know?
could fill another couple, hour and a half, 2 hours with, I mean, it,
Yeah,
with
exactly.
flaws and things that yeah,
Yeah.
we're all
And then
broken.
you'd be welcome back on anytime, man, because this
Well,
is a
thank
great
you.
conversation, man. I appreciate it. Before we get ready and wrap up though, what's
Yeah.
something that you feel you can still improve upon and learn?
Oh man, in my life,
Yeah.
I'm my own worst enemy, like anybody else. I need to improve on lots of things, like everybody else. Sometimes my, I look in the mirror. I you know, I I can improve on my uh giving confidence to myself that I can do things that I know that I can do, but the voice in my head tells me that
Mm,
I'm not good enough to do. Um,
I
I'll give
struggle
you
with that
an
constantly.
example. I've been to so many different studios, in and out with people trying to record, trying to find this sound with my new songs, and it's just and all along since I was very very young, I've been recording. And I didn't have the confidence in myself. I kept on saying like, "Oh, I can't do it. I don't know what I'm doing." And then at just about in the beginning of the year, and um, I'll give a plug for the guys at Infowars. Again, that organization, Alex Jones was there for me when nobody else was, and Owen Schroyer and the people behind the scenes there are just, I pray for them. They're a blessing to all of us. I went through, Alex Jones released something called Reset Wars, and it was spiritual. It was connected to politics. It was connected to like history. It was just an amazing thing. And it was very profound, and it really helped me organize my mind and say that the things that are in my mind, these viruses that I have, these voices that are, like the record playing, I have the power. And it's the same thing, right? We heard it in the military. You hear it by leaders of great men. We have the power. All we have to do is make the decision to change our lives. I was in a really dark place, and I was sick. A year ago, it was just an awful thing. I was just like turning into this thing, like, and I realized it's me. All I have to do is make the decision to get up and go and stand up and change my life, and not, so there's a lot that I need to improve on. I work on stuff every day. Um, I've committed myself to going back to the gym. I'm training to go out on this tour that we talked about, and I push myself again. Like when I was young, I lost a lot of weight. I lost a lot of muscle mass. Um, and so I've committed myself again to a lot of things that I hadn't been doing. I hate getting up in the morning. It's one of the, I hate getting up in the morning. So I
Yeah.
push myself. I get up 6:15, and I'm in the gym by 7 a.m. and I push myself to work harder up my podcast. And I've been recording my own music, and I got Pete Parada from the Offspring playing drums for me on some tunes, and Frank Kavanaugh, and
Yeah.
um, so I've really changed my life around, and made decisions to just make myself better. And anybody can do it. Anybody can do it. You
Well, I
have to
needed
make
to
the
hear that
decisions.
myself, man, because I struggle with that negative voice and letting that win. And I'm definitely not a morning
Yeah.
person either, man. So
At some point, and I always say this again when I'm preaching to young people, and I have kids as well, and it's always the same thing. I raise animals too. I live on a small farm. The We've all heard you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. That's a profound statement, because we are given that the ability to choose as humans. And it's a powerful thing. Weapons don't change the world. Wars don't change the world. Famine, what changes the world are our thoughts. As soon as we change our thoughts, everything can change. And only we are the only ones that have the opportunity, to make those decisions. And it's a very powerful thing. And that's why the decision to not accept, for example, not accept Jesus or to accept Jesus, that's a huge thing. Maybe you know that you have to change something in your life. You know it. And the only person that can take that first step, nobody in the world can make that for you. You yourself have to do that. And sometimes that's why people like us, believers, you say, well, I don't have the human strength. Of course you don't have the human strength. That's why you need God. That's why I need God, because I don't have the strength to do this myself. These kids in the farm and the pressure of the public and the music, I can't keep that all together. It's only by the grace of God and his mercy on me and the discernment and the power and the strength of the Holy Spirit and all these things that gets me through. It's really the only thing. And so we have to make that decision. And that's the door, right? That's Jesus knocking on the door. You just got to open the door. So like Nike says, you just do it. Just jump, just get out of the plane.
And there's that preacher that we talked about at the beginning too, I mean,
yeah.
Awesome, brother. Love it. So like, before we get ready and wrap up, I know I keep saying that, but I want to ask you some of the questions that I normally ask guests when I have them on.
Sure.
Who are your top 3 musical artists?
Oh boy.
I know these are the toughest questions for musicians.
I'm a huge U2 fan. I'm a huge U2 fan. I just love their music so much. So they're number 1. Oh my God. I love the Ramones. I love the Ramones a lot. Their music is incredible. I see David Bowie in my mind. I want to say David Bowie, incredible artist. It's hard. It's hard. Like I said, I love music with a passion. Like I love music, so it's hard to really put people at the top. I think that I would have to put U2 at the top, though, from a very young age. I became a U2 fan.
Nice. And this will probably be another tough one then. But is there a particular song that you feel has inspired you, or that is a go-to whenever you need that, that pump, that extra motivation?
Well, it's like an old school song that I'll go to. Something like My Michelle from Guns N' Roses. I don't know. I love The Police. Sometimes I've been listening to a lot of Beatles lately. Like when I'm in the gym, I'll listen to Lamb of God. I'll listen to Megadeth. Sweet. They're hard questions. I just never sat and ordered in my mind and did the arithmetic to be able to properly display, my favorite. My favorite's hard, man.
Sometimes it changes from day to day. It's like you said, it's a feeling. It's what's grabbing you.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a weird cross of like, if you took Kurt Cobain, Bono, Johnny Rotten, Joey Ramone, Glenn Danzig, and just kind of smushed them all together with a little bit of Freddie Mercury and Jim Morrison, that's where the idea of my Stitches came up, because Doyle and I would sit around and we would have this conversation like, and I would say those things and we would laugh and you'd be like, yeah, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I'm like, yeah, it's like you guys went out and you dug up all these dead bodies of these musicians and sewn them back together and you created me. And we were like, oh, what a cool concept that is of like a sewn together scarecrow looking guy. Which is where then I was like, oh, cool. I'm going to start drawing stitches. Like, I'm like, you guys find different parts of me.
Sweet. And then I know this is going to be good. What class do you feel should be mandatory before graduating high school?
A mandatory class before you graduate high school should probably be some sort of like like business, like a business type class. Yeah, because if I think that if I had more of an understanding of economics and the way that business worked, like real estate, how you buy a house, and all those things, I definitely would have had more of an understanding of the power that I had as a young man with the amount of money that I did. I didn't know all the things that were like the options that I had. I didn't, I don't know what a 401k is. How do you buy a house? I didn't care. That was never taught to me at all. I went to an alternate high school. I went to school on a small bus, but it was an arts and music based program. So I learned a lot about music and art and theater and performing and writing, but not much about business or economics.
Gotcha. And then who are three people who've inspired you or you can credit for making you the man you are today?
My mom. I give most of the credit to my mom, the way that she raised me and the example that she was and is. I find myself saying a lot of the same things to my children, and when I see teachable moments, when I come across teachable moments, I find myself teaching and imparting the same things in the same way that my mother did to me, because they were effective. And really only through life experience that I truly understand them in a way that now I'm able to pass them on to my children. I would really have to say that, this is my mom. My life has been so tumultuous. There's been so many people that have come in and out of my life, yet no one that I can really, put my finger on that has been with me, the whole time, that has helped guide me and bring me through. And which is another reason that I have such faith and loyalty to God, because when there was no one, I always felt that there were times when I felt that there was no one. There was always that voice saying, there is someone, and you are loved by the most massive force that has ever been in all of creation, because it is creation. There's this, all of a sudden, then what would flow into me was this enormity of love and power and strength that is beyond my human recognition, but I was always able to sense it in a way, and I found comfort in that. um Even though I've tumbled through life in a lot of ways, I really have to. I've tumbled through life very Forrest Gumpish. So, my mom, that's about it. There's no one else that comes to mind that I can point to, really. Nobody.
Gotcha.
There's people that have come into my life that have taught me profound lessons that I know were placed in my life. Somebody like Pete Steele, somebody like Dave Mustaine, somebody like my friend who passed away when I was 18, who I think about every day. Like, those people popped into my life. That's why I say, like Forrest Gump, all these amazing people, some well known, some not known at all, have popped into my life, and just these incredible lessons have been revealed to me. I've been able to see through life experience how those experiences pushed me along a path that I didn't even know I was walking on, that I only got there again through discernment.
Gotcha. And then favorite toy as a child?
Voltron. I loved my Voltron. I was so stoked when I got all the lions finally.
Yeah, I mean, I used to love watching that cartoon before heading off to school and everything. That and Battlestar
Yeah.
Galactica were like
Yeah.
two of my favorites, man.
G.I. Joe. They would shoot the shit out of everybody, but no one would get shot.
Yeah, they're worse than stormtroopers.
Right.
And then, I mean, we touched on it earlier, um, but you know, we've even before what's going on in the Ukraine right now, we've had military deployed all across the world. Our soldiers and sailors and service members. What message do you have for any of our brothers and sisters serving overseas right now?
May God be with you and protect you and get you home safe to your family. Nobody wants war. War is, you know, one of the things that's scary that you hear are all of these people that know nothing of violence and that know nothing of war. And and you know, people who truly know violence and great warriors who really know what battle and combat actually is usually want no part in it because it is
Yeah.
so awful and horrible. And it is. I pray for every human soul except for the you know, for the evil ones that are truly doing evil against. I even pray for them a bit. But it's a scary moment. It really is a scary moment for our world, for our country, for our military, for our children, for our history. There's madmen at the wheel. There's absolute madmen at the wheel. You listen to mainstream media and they're lying. They're lying about huge gaping facts and things that people need to have to understand this conflict and what is actually happening. And if this isn't like sleepwalk, this isn't like, you know, this isn't like the Iraq war or Afghanistan. This is like, you know, in 45 minutes after, you know, half the planet will be dead. If this escalates into a nuclear conflict, and so I pray for peace, and I pray that we can build a better world for our children. I lived a great life. My life is just fantastic, and I don't want to die. I'm ready to die. And you know, I never kill myself, but my point is that I've lived a good life. It's not about me and the things that I want to do, and that's why I'm able to sacrifice the things that I do sacrifice. Again, I live on a farm. I got enough food here for a year. I raise animals and stuff. I could live off the land and take care of my family. So they could take everything from me, and I just go Little House on the Prairie, baby. I got my Alexa Pure filter, bitch. So yeah, it's a scary time, and you know what can I say? We're truly fight. You know, people think that the Nazis were defeated after World War II. In a lot of ways, they were defeated, but they just
they were recruited.
yeah, it continued. It didn't go away. The war ended, but it didn't go away, and it's here again. It's here again. That's one thing I absolutely do agree with is the denazification of those areas over there. They're real Nazis over there. I know that's a whole different conversation, but there's just huge gaps of information that people aren't getting about what's happening with this conflict. It's just, oh, Russia is what? Russia wants to take over the world? That's not real. Russia doesn't want to take over the world.
I'm with you, man. I've been following some of the same intel as you and Frank, you know. So another thing that I'm glad we're getting a chance to talk and connect. And like I said, we could do definitely have you on again for future ones to talk on so many subjects. And there is something I do want to, when we go off the air here, I want to run by you too before you log off. But if any of the fans out there want, or any of the listeners are new to learning about you and want to follow what you're doing, pick up some of your music, support your merch, support your cause, and try and catch you at one of these shows on the upcoming tour, where would you send them?
officialmichaelgraves.com. If you go over to officialmichaelgraves.com, all of my social sites are there. Articles that you can read, videos, links to music, officialmichaelgraves.com, and sign up for the newsletter when it pops up there too. We just put up the ad mat, the poster for the for the tour. And there's a video on there. You know, you could check out the different packages that I offer and how they're set up, and really, even if you're not interested in it, you could just see the uniqueness of what I do as a musician, as an artist, as an entertainer, and apparently as an evangelist. So officialmichaelgraves.com.
Awesome, man. And that's one of the things I want to talk to you about before we log off here. But one last favor I want to ask you though before we end the broadcast part. You mind cutting a promo ID for the show? Just introduce yourself, and you're listening to today's Boondoggle.
Sure. Hi, I'm Michael Graves, and you're listening to today's Boondoggle.
Awesome, brother. Man, I appreciate it, man. Thank you for being so generous with your time. It's a great conversation. It was, like I said, so much more I want to talk about, but
get in touch, man. Let me know when you jump on, and if you want to do whatever. Let me know the topic that you want to breach, and I'll come on and we'll shoot the shit.
Sounds good, man. I'm gonna wrap up the broadcast real quick, but give me a second.